story that's been playing out here in South Africa. A third group of South African National Defence Force, SANDF troops, arrived at Waterkloof Air Force Base over the weekend. Another group is arriving today in Pretoria following their deployment to the Democratic Republic of Congo as part of the Southern African Development Committee's SADC mission. Now, the phased withdrawal comes after months of high-risk operations in the eastern DRC, where violence between the rebel groups and state forces has escalated. Now, the mission has come at a heavy cost, though, including the loss of 14 South African soldiers. To unpack the broader implications of this drawdown and what it signals for South Africa's defence posture and regional peacekeeping commitments, we're now joined by Guy Martin, who's the editor of DefenceWeb, a respected military and security analyst. Guy, thanks very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program. Hello, Guy, are you there? All right. Guy. All right. Guy, the repatriation of South African troops from the DRC has been described as chaotic by some, with reports of poor coordination, logistical confusion. What exactly went wrong with the first group's return last Friday?
A lot of the organization has been the responsibility of the SADC. Because South Africa doesn't have its own aircraft, it's had to use chartered aircraft to get our troops home. In this case, Air Tanzania was tasked with that responsibility. Initially, the first batch of troops was supposed to come back on two aircraft, two smaller aircraft that could land at Bromfisher International Airport in Bloemfontein. But at the last minute, Air Tanzania changed that to one larger aircraft, Boeing 787 Dreamliner. Now, unfortunately, the ground handling equipment wasn't available in Bloemfontein to support that aircraft, so it had to land at Air Force Base Waterkloof in Pretoria. So that was one major problem. So when the troops arrived, they had to be taken by a bus from Waterkloof to Bloemfontein. But there were also major delays. There was a whole knock-on effect from the buses that were carrying the troops from the Goma in the DRC through Rwanda to the staging ground in Mozambique. So some of the issues were caused by the service provider that was operating the buses. It also took quite a few hours for the troops to check in. So as the first time this was happening, there were many issues that sort of compounded the whole process. The result was that the family members who were waiting in Bloemfontein, they had to wait basically another 12 hours until they could see their family members. So it was rather shambolic, but the SANDF has made assurances that the subsequent batches of troops will be received in a much more orderly manner. So we saw the second batch arrive late on Sunday afternoon, and we're expecting a third batch of troops to arrive on Monday evening.
All right, let's take a look a little bit at, the military are going to have one view, politicians certainly another. This deployment in the DRC under the SADC mission, what was the strategic objective? We hear the word peacekeeping, and we hear that others saying there was no way this was a peacekeeping mission. Either way, were the objectives met that we are withdrawing from this region?
Unfortunately not. The SAMI-DRC mission went in to support the government of the DRC to reduce violence and curb armed groups, but it achieved none of those objectives, unfortunately. If you look at the situation in the east of the DRC now, the M23, they've taken even more territory. They've put their own government leadership in place in Goma. The territory's been expanding. Yes, there are peace talks, but on the ground, the M23 control the situation. So if you look at the objectives of the SAMI DRC, unfortunately, they were not met. Politicians are trying to sort of spin this as a relative success in that the conflict resulted in a move to the peace talks, but there was no other option left. SAMI DRC forces, they couldn't use military power to bring the rebels to the negotiating table, and only when SAMI DRC had its back to the wall, that forced negotiations. And I think Felix Tshisekedi, the president of the DRC, he was very reluctant to negotiate with Rwanda and the M23 rebels because he thought he had a fighting chance on the ground. And with the fall of Goma, that eroded, that possibility fell away, and he had to go to the negotiating table because there just wasn't any other option.
So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be looked at as a difficult one. I heard one of the senior figures of the South African Army speaking to troops, saying that there will be a debrief and a tete-a-tete with the troops, where it will be a sparring session. What is likely to come out from the soldiers, do you think?
I think they will be extremely upset about the handling of this whole situation. I suspect morale is at absolute rock bottom, not just for the way this withdrawal is being handled, but for the way they were sent to this mission in the first place. The guys on the ground did a good job. They worked as hard as they could. If you look at the killed to loss ratio, 14 South African soldiers were killed, 700 rebels were killed. They put up as best a fight they could, but they were sent in without air support. They didn't have proper logistics. They didn't have enough numbers. There was supposed to be at least 5,000 SAMI DRC troops in the DRC, but we never saw. We saw maybe 2,500 at best. The UN had 20,000 troops at their highest in the DRC, and they weren't able to bring stability. So it's highly unlikely that 5,000 troops would be able to do that job. So the mission went in under strength, under-equipped, without proper logistic support. And I think the soldiers are going to be pretty sore about that.
There's been this constant story about not enough investment in our army, just not having enough, as you've mentioned, resources, not having enough firepower in terms of planes flying over. What is your take? As someone who's seen military operations over time, could it have been done better?
Oh, definitely. I'd say maybe 15 years ago, we had the resources to effectively carry out a mission like this. We had transport aircraft, we had working attack helicopters, we had much better serviceability across the board. The defense budget was in a slightly better place. But it's been cut and cut and cut ever since, whereas the responsibilities of the SANDF have just been increasing all the time. And the result is that nearly 70% of the budget goes to salaries, not enough is going towards operations and equipment. And so we can't afford to project power anymore. We can't deploy 2,000-3,000 kilometers away. And we just don't have that ability anymore. So the politicians need to realize that they can't be sending the SANDF off on these sorts of missions because it just isn't strong enough anymore. And unfortunately, rebel groups and other non-state actors will be looking at the failed SAMI DRC mission and realizing that they can probably get away with a lot more than they could because the SANDF is a shadow of its former self.
One hears that there's going to be a reintegration process. That sounds odd. I mean, soldiers are just redeployed, right? Or is there something more about this mission that needs, I don't know, some different kind of treatment for these troops?
It's pretty standard to demobilize troops when they come back from a deployment, whether it's border patrol, whether it's peacekeeping. I think there's a bit of extra psychosocial support required for a mission like this. Some of the troops have been away for over a year. They've been in combat. They've been essentially held hostage by the M23 rebels. They've gone through a lot. Whilst they were stuck in Goma, sometimes they were only receiving a meal a day. So they've been through a very difficult time, and I think they're going to probably need a little bit of extra adjustment to get back to the normal swing of things when they're in South Africa. So I believe it's about 3 days or so of reintegration and demobilization. Then they'll be able to return to their bases and then see their families again.
Guy, we're going to leave it there. Thanks very, very much indeed for joining us. And great publication. I must tell you that I'm a subscriber. Thank you for keeping us informed. That's Guy Martin, editor of DefenceWeb, a well-respected analyst on military and security matters. And he's the editor of DefenceWeb, online publication. If you want to keep up to date with matters military, that's a really good place to call on.
Africa Update on Channel Africa.